Well, it sure has been a while. Welcome to Faith in the Folds, a podcast for ministry, biblical studies, and Christian living. I'm your host, Kevin Burr. It has been a long time since I have done one of these podcasts, and if you're watching online, thank you very much, by the way, you might notice that there is a little bit of a scene change behind me. Still have plenty of books, the same books behind me, but they are arranged differently because I am in a different location. Those of you who know me know that we have moved from the wonderful and extraordinary King's Crossing Church of Christ in Corpus Christi, Texas, up to the bustling metropolis of Searcy, Arkansas, where I am now teaching in Harding University's College of Bible and Ministry. I get to teach New Testament classes and Greek classes, and I teach freshmen all the way to seniors. It's just been a wonderful time. This might surprise some of you. We didn't leave due to any duress or anything like that. And in King's Crossing, that's a wonderful church. They blessed us immensely, and continue to bless us as we still keep up with friends down there. I got to see JD just the other day when he was up here in Searcy for a youth ministry conference. So glad to still, even in some small way, hope to be able to bless that wonderful group of folks down there in Corpus Christi, Texas. But for many of you who might know this, I have wanted to be a professor for a long time. Honestly, the very first person who ever said anything like that to me was someone who's now a colleague. She was my undergraduate advisor in the history department, Dr. Julie Harris, and I told her, it's like, this was like freshman or sophomore year. Told her, it's like, I think I'll go teach high school history and social studies, and I don't know if on a whim or what, but and surely there's no reason for her to remember this, but she said, "Have you ever thought about being a professor?" And no, honestly, I hadn't. I mean, I had never been around professors, and so I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I didn't know that was an option for just regular, rather unimpressive students like myself. And so, when she said that, I thought, that sounds really fascinating. My very first Bible class, my very first class at Harding University was with Dr. Phil Thompson, and it was New Testament survey. So in one semester for freshmen, they cover the whole New Testament. And that seems kind of crazy in some ways, because these days, freshman Bible class is split up over 1 year. So you get Gospels in the fall and Acts through Revelation in the spring, which is what I'm teaching right now for freshmen. I had Dr. Phil Thompson, and just loved that class. Dr. Thompson walked us through some of the technical details of the New Testament, historical issues, but also just made it seem very real to us. It was eminently practical and all of that. And in the spring semester, and this was probably around the time that Dr. Harris said this to me, I had Dr. Dale Manor, who is still around. He and Dale and Phil. It's wild that I'm on first name basis with these guys. Those guys, I had Dr. Manor, and I remember watching him teach and thought, I want to teach like that. He had such a command, not just of the text, but also of the world that the text comes from. And so in biblical studies, we call that the ancient Near East. And, some, bizarre, seemingly bizarre point of, ancient, Israelite or, ancient Canaanite archaeology. He was able to make that relevant for us. He was able to show us, when the history of the world, of that part of the world was relevant, and cultural practices, and how that came to bear on the text, and sort of what that meant, and also still able to consistently show us how, the message of the Old Testament very much coheres with what God did in Jesus. And so I fell in love with Bible classes in my freshman year, and then sometime, I think in my freshman year, freshman or early sophomore year, Dr. Harris said, "Well, have you ever thought about being a professor?" And like I said, the honest answer to that was no, I hadn't thought about that. So what happened was I changed my undergraduate major to history because it was from social science with teacher licensure to history. So there was not much difference. I just didn't take as many education classes during undergrad. Well, I went through all that, but then also decided, and this is probably, oh goodness, I'm increasingly convinced that God prepares us for things well before we even know that we're going to need to be prepared for that. So I'm increasingly convinced that that's the case. And I'll repeat that again, that God prepares us for things before we even know that we need to be prepared for those things. And so, sophomore year, I'm still a history major, and I learned that we could take New Testament Greek classes. Well, I'd had some prior exposure to New Testament Greek because of where I grew up going to church, Donaldson Church of Christ, and just had a long history of preachers that I remember from when I was little who had some facility with Greek. One of whom, the very first one that was there when I was very little, Bob Hendren, he preached when he preached from the New Testament, he preached from his Greek New Testament, but was so good at being able to translate it that it wasn't immediately obvious, at least not to the untrained ear. And then afterwards, a couple of folks that, again, I remember when I was little, Mark Black and Randy Harris, when they were both at Lipscomb, both those guys, with facility in Greek, it was not unusual for me to hear about Greek words from the pulpit. It was not unusual for me to hear about that in Bible classes at church. My cousin had checked out our church library's Greek English interlinear, and then later I had checked that out. At some point, I was in 8th grade when I was trying to teach myself Greek words, and I went to John 14:6, right? Which I could quote now in Greek, but I was trying to learn Greek words, and like I just hadn't even been taught that. It was just something inherent in me that raised some interesting questions about nature versus nurture and things like that. But I was just enthralled with it. So sophomore year, I get the opportunity here at Harding in the fall of 2005. Can you imagine that was 20 years ago? But in the fall of 2005, I started taking Greek, and I remember thinking, well, it's an elective, but it's somewhat justified because I am a history major and Greek is historical, right? That was my justification. My parents were exceedingly patient with me as I sometimes meandered, sometimes sprinted through my collegiate journey and beyond. And so I started doing that, and then kept taking Greek. It ended up taking 7 total semesters, 6 in undergrad, and then my last one was my first year of grad school here when I was working on a Master's of Science in Education to get a licensure for high school history and social studies. So again, I'd kind of gone back to this idea of maybe teaching, because honestly, I wasn't a great student in undergrad. I like to say that I had 4.0 aspirations and 2.0 work ethic. So if you do the math, which I am also not very good at, anybody else break out into the math sweats? But if you do the math, right, you can average out my undergraduate GPA. It was just a very unimpressive 3.0. Again, my parents exceedingly patient with me. But it was in the middle of my student teaching, which had a great student teaching experience. Shout out to the Pangburn School District in Pangburn, Arkansas. If you think Searcy's small, do they even have a stoplight in Pangburn? Maybe one. Anyway, smaller than Wilmore, Kentucky, for those of you who happen to know the Asbury community. Had a great student teaching experience there. But I distinctly remember one afternoon I was preparing my notes for class. I think it was on World War II for the high school junior level American history class that I was teaching. And I thought, I looked over at my, at that point, very modest bookshelf where I had just a few things over there. My UBS Greek New Testament, my big lexicon, Daniel Wallace's grammar and a couple of other things like that. I mean, just a very few things like that, and not anywhere near compared to what you might be able to see behind me. I had all of that, and I thought, man, I miss that. I miss that. And so, in the course of the following days and weeks, I reconnected with a couple of professors that I'd had previously. One was Dr. Paul Pollard, who I took for Greek 5, 6, and 7. So, text criticism and manuscripts, Greek 5, Acts, Greek 6, and Romans for Greek 7. And I asked Dr. Pollard, he's like, I'm planning to teach high school history and social studies. I'm dating this girl at the time who's finishing up physical therapy school at Belmont. Shout out to my lovely wife, Linnea. And, I kind of want to keep up with my Greek. Would it make sense to take a Greek class at Vandy or something? I'd love to still continue doing this. And he said, Kevin, you should really take a look at the grad school, by which he meant Harding University Graduate School of Religion in Memphis, thankfully, now known as Harding School of Theology. He mentioned that, and I started thinking, it's like that. I mean, that would be like a whole other MDiv, or like a whole other master's degree, like a master's of divinity. Well, then in conversations with Dr. Jared Dockery, and one of the beautiful things about that transitional period from undergraduate student to graduate student, and I even tell my upperclassmen this too, it's like yes, you're still students, but you're increasingly closer to being a colleague with me, being a peer. And so that's one of the benefits of being an older graduate student, that you can interact with some of your professors more on that peer-to-peer level. And I thoroughly enjoyed the times that I spent with Dr. Jared Dockery. One evening in particular, he mentioned to me, we were at a coffee shop, which I got hot chocolate because I don't have those kinds of chemical vices. Although if you're watching this and you can see this can of Diet Coke here, that's I could single-handedly float to Coke stock. But we we were talking one evening at this place, and I mentioned, hey, I've been enjoying this, and kind of miss my Greek study and things like that. And he's like, Kevin, you seem to have a gift for languages. It'd be a shame if you wasted that. And I hadn't considered at that moment that I was wasting this. I was still using it. I would still read my Greek New Testament. Sometimes I'd take it with me during lunch at when I was doing my student teaching and so on. But I wasn't teaching any kind of Bible class or learning any sort of Bible devotional or anything like that. I wasn't doing anything with it other than just kind of maintaining it. And so there was some very serious prayer that I had to do during 2009 and 2010. And it was in that moment that I realized, as crazy as this is, and this sounds absolutely crazy, especially if you know the job market for professors, and just, how difficult it is to get credentialed to do this. Meaning, there's no guarantee that I could have even gotten into a PhD program or anything like that, right? And I'm not saying, hey, look at me, look how awesome I am because I did this really difficult thing. It's like, no. God has been exceedingly gracious to me and worked on me, and all glory and praise to Him. Again, because those poor professors in the history department who had to suffer through so many bad papers and things. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is absolutely not about me. But it's hard to get into a PhD program. It's hard to get through a PhD program. And then there's absolutely no guarantee that you would even get into, that there would even be a job available for you. And yet, something just kind of made sense about this. And I say that at sort of a superficial level. In hindsight, based on the amount of prayer that I was doing and prayers that I know that others were lifting up on my behalf, I had this crazy in the sense of not what you would expect, but I had this sense of peace about this plan that I was going to go to Harding School of Theology to spend 4 more years in grad school to get a Master's of Divinity in order to prepare myself to go somewhere, didn't know where, to get a PhD, probably in New Testament, and then with the hopes of maybe finding a job teaching undergraduate Bible. That sounds crazy, especially knowing what I know now about how tight the job market is for jobs like this. And here early February of 2025, the College of Bible and Ministry just announced a couple of additional openings. My dean told me last week when we were talking about some of these openings, he said, we'll get 30 applicants for one position. There's absolutely no guarantee that I or anybody should get into a position like this. And so all that to say, I started from 2010, so 15 years ago, I just had this crazy notion that, I want to be a professor. I want to teach. And I'm so grateful that I came from a family full of teachers, full of people who have been given this gift. Both my folks are retired teachers. My oldest brother is a teacher. I've got an aunt, an aunt who did a lot of teaching, an uncle did a lot of teaching, a cousin who is a teacher, professor. And so we've done, it's just kind of in our family. And by God's grace, I was brought up to speed. Let's put it that way. It's not like, hey, look at me, look how much I succeeded in Memphis there. It's like, no, God brought me up to speed. And, I got through my MDiv, and then 6 years for a PhD. And and then was extremely blessed during my PhD and after my doctoral studies, so during and after, to be involved in congregational ministry, and took those academic skills and tried to use those skills to bless others in ways that I had been blessed. It really did hit me when I was in Asbury. When I was in Asbury, that there was a wonderful little church just up the road in Nicholasville, Kentucky, where one of my Harding School Theology classmates had started preaching, and when he went up to Asbury for his PhD, now my colleague, Dr. Jordan Guy, and so we. I'd kind of followed him, and another classmate and I both did some preaching and teaching and song leading. Also, I am not a great song leader, but I know how to pitch a song and know how to keep tempo. So I'm not a strong singer, but with what little I had, was able to bless these wonderful folks in Nicholasville, Kentucky. And but in thinking about that, my vision was never, I want to be a minister. But then go teach. My vision was always, well, I want to go teach. But one of the things that I distinctly remember, one of the last conversations that I ever had with Dr. Ken Naller, whom I took for Greek 3 and 4, so Gospel of John and 1 Corinthians. One of the last conversations I ever had with him before he died suddenly in 2011 or 2012. I asked him, how do I how do I get to do what you're doing? And he said, if you really want to teach at a place like this, you need to be a minister. He said, be a minister. That was not what I was interested in. I almost double majored in biblical languages when I was a student here, because I wanted to take Greek and Hebrew. I ended up just minoring in Greek, but I didn't end up doing the Bible major because I didn't want to take all the preaching and doctrine classes. I looked at all that stuff. I was like, oh man, just give me the Bible. Just give me the Bible. Now I would have been blessed immensely and so on, but God is gracious, and I am absolutely convinced, based on how everything is shaken out. I'm absolutely convinced that that God allowed me to meander through some of this in order to get me to where He needed me to be, in order to give me the time that I honestly very much needed to become equipped to do what it is that I'm doing now. But that had always kind of stuck with me. And so then when this opportunity at Nicholasville showed up, I distinctly remember thinking, I've got this sacred duty and this holy obligation to take this world-class education that I've gotten at Harding School of Theology and that I'm currently getting at Asbury Theological Seminary. I need to bless others with this. And again, don't hear that in a self-serving way, like I've got all this to share because I'm so awesome. That wasn't it. It's like I was given so much, so I needed to give so much. I was given so much, and so I needed to give so much. And that's what I did. And so for 4 years there, from 2016 to 2020, I served as one of the preaching and teaching ministers at the Nicholasville Church of Christ. And then when I graduated with my doctorate, Linnea and the boys and I moved to Corpus Christi, Kentucky. Wait a second. Started to get it all mixed up. It's all running together. Moved from Kentucky to Corpus Christi, Texas. And that was another opportunity for me to put into practice the things that I had learned to bless people with the gift set that I had been blessed with. It was a great opportunity for me to learn even more how to minister to others, and at the risk of neglecting someone in Corpus Christi, I won't name a lot of names, but you know who you are. Yeah, because you're probably listening right now. Thank you, but you know who you are. But I approached that ministry as this idea, or with this idea that I don't know how long God has put us here, but we're not gonna waste time. We're not gonna sit on our hands. We're gonna jump in and we're gonna bless these folks, because that's what God has called us to do. One of the lessons that I learned most fully when I was in Nicholasville, and then again when I was in Corpus Christi, is a faithful application of the parable of the talents, that God has given these gracious gifts, and He does not expect everyone to generate the same amount. What God expects is for you to be faithful with what you've been given. What God expects is for you to be faithful with what you've been given. And so what I had been given was, small groups in Corpus Christi, adult Bible classes, and arranging adult Bible classes and coordinating Bible class teachers and helping find and write curriculum and things like that. And then other duties as assigned. If you're a minister, you know what that means. Thankfully, though, extremely blessed to work with that group down in Corpus Christi. But even then, I had expected, that maybe God will send me to a place where I can teach. As I think it's fair to say, looking back back over the relatively short course of my life, I turned 40 this year, Don't tell my wife that. she, she still likes to think that I'm a lot younger than I am. Um, but in the relatively short course of my life, and in the nearly 10 years that I had served in congregational ministry, I can look back on that time, and really even a longer stretch of time, and realize that God was so gracious and patient and gave me the time that I needed to for Him to push me, and sometimes drag me, but sometimes gently nudge me into realizing where He was leading me, and all of that. And so throughout the course of that, I had learned that I can preach the best sermon I can preach. I can do the best song leading. I can be so over prepared for a simple Sunday morning Bible class or Wednesday night Bible class. I can do all of that, and I and the others that I work with can put together can plan the best VBS or you know trunk or treat, or any other kind of like community outreach program or something like that. And what happens if it's not? What happens if it's not so well attended? What do you do? Do you get upset? Do you get mad? It's like eventually I had to learn. It's like, no, I'm going to work with what God has given me. And so if I see, and this is not just at the couple of churches that I've mentioned, but at any church, right? If you're in some kind of ministry position and you see those people that are kind of on the margins, but when you actually interact with them, or when they do happen to speak up in a Bible class, and they've got great stuff to say, and they've got such a heart for service and the kinds of things that God is leading us to do, but they just are so intermittently, connected and involved. It's so intermittently involved. Yes, encourage them, but at the end of the day, right? They've they've made their decision, and I can't constantly lament what could have been, or what should have been. I just got to work with what I've got. And so if I've planned an event and 5 people show up, but I really need 12, hey man, we're going to work with that 5 people, and I've got to roll with that. That's been one of the best blessings that I've had, because it takes a lot off of me, right? To think that, like this event has to be so good, or this thing has to go so well because that reflects on me. It's like, well, I mean, there's something to be said for good planning, right? But it was so liberating to know that, man, if I'm just faithful in what God has given me, and I push myself to consistently be faithful with what God has given me, God's going to work. He's going to work. I'm going to give Him something to work with, but He's going to work. There are a host of other lessons that I could mention here in this discussion, but eventually the call went out last year. It was Christmas break, not 2023, or not 2024, but 2023, Christmas break 2023. The call went out that the College of Bible and Ministry and Harding School of Theology was hiring, because as the school was being moved from Memphis to Searcy, there was the inevitable, when any kind of institution like that moves, there's the inevitable shakeout, and for one reason or another, it's not in this person or that person's best interest, and all that kind of stuff. And so when the school moved, when Harding School of Theology moved from Memphis to Searcy this year, this school year, that opened up a possibility to teach here. And by God's grace and goodness, we ended up getting that opportunity. And so I've since last August, I've been an assistant professor of Bible and Ministry in Harding University's College of Bible and Ministry. I teach New Testament and Greek classes, and it has it has been challenging in some ways. Um, it has been uplifting in many ways, and I'm exceedingly grateful for the opportunity to do this, because what I get to do is train just general students. I get to teach general students who probably will never hold any kind of like ministry position, but they absolutely could be, you know, some sort of like volunteer ministry leader or deacons or elders. It's absolutely reasonable that they could be in one of those positions. And I constantly tell my class of 50 freshmen, all but like two are Bible majors. It's like, hey, it's perfectly reasonable for you to expect that if you've gone through Harding and you have been through all these Bible classes that we require you to take, it's perfectly reasonable that wherever you end up at church, you could and should be asked to lead some kind of Bible class or Bible study, or lead some kind of devotional or something like that. I want to help equip you to read the Bible well. I want to help equip you to train yourself to ask the right kinds of questions when you read the Bible. And especially when I get to teach the classes that I get to teach for majors, so those are a lot of fun. Obviously, people want to teach students who are intrinsically motivated for for learning, right? And so you'll have somebody who's you have the the person who's particularly enthusiastic about your class or your material, and they're not a Bible major, but most of the Bible majors that I've encountered with are intrinsically motivated and enthusiastic about learning more about this. It's wonderful to see it in their eyes. It's like they've been given permission to ask all these questions that they might not have just even had time to ask in their home congregations or in home Bible studies or things like that. And so now they're so excited to track all this down. A student today, we're talking about the seminar in Paul's prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. A student we're talking about that today, and I said, man, it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. I was like, man, I just wish we had more time in that class. And he said, oh yeah, seminars never have enough time. Man, it'd be great to spend hours going over this material. We can't, obviously. But what I am so excited that I get to do now is train not just general students who, hopefully will be able to teach Bible classes in their churches or lead Bible studies or give devotionals or things like that. But I also get to train future ministers. I get to train future ministers. I get to train future teachers, and preachers, and missionaries, and church planters, and people who get to do the kinds of things that I got to do in Corpus Christi. So discipleship minister, which is associate minister with a more biblical title. And what we get to do with them is equip them with the knowledge and the skills that they need to continue on and to go and bless these other churches and these other places that God will lead them to. What an incredible blessing. What an incredible blessing. It's very much like what I was doing in the church contexts where I worked. But in this setting, in some ways it's like a rotation. It's a cycle where I get these folks for just this time, and so be faithful with what you have been given. Well, I've been given maybe these students for a semester or a couple of years or something like that. It's an immense blessing. It's an immense blessing. It's something that I take very seriously, and as difficult then as it was to leave such a wonderful place like King's Crossing, and as difficult as it was to leave Nicholasville. This is, I'm not unaware of how crazy it might sound, but I want to say that I think this is something that God has equipped me to do. And even just in the short amount of time, by God's grace, I can see how I've grown. I was talking with a colleague earlier today after chapel, Dr. Justin Bland, who is a colleague now, but has been a friend for 19 years. I was talking with him. He's like, Burr, how's the semester going? And I said, oh man, the spring semester is so much easier in some ways because I just simply know how much to prepare for a class period. And he smiled big. He's been doing this a long time, and so he gets it. He totally gets it. I thank God that I'm still growing in this role, and excited to see kind of how all this goes. Probably the big picture thing that I teach my students is this, and so this is what I want to leave us with for the next little section of this. I wanted to give you kind of a just an update of sort of hey, why has Faith in the Folds been quiet for so long? The last episode that I did was summer 2024. And I've had a few little posts here and there, maybe like a couple of short reels or shorts on YouTube. But I wanted to give you a little bit longer episode where I get to talk about kind of where Faith in the Folds is, and encourage you that nope, Faith in the Folds is not going away. Now that I'm in this setting, I've got all these colleagues that I am interested in talking with about different things, and how exactly to do that just at a logistical level. Like, do they show up in my office, or do I Zoom with them when they're literally across campus? Stuff like that. We'll figure all that out. But the thing that I want to leave you with today is kind of the overarching, scheme or worldview that I try to present to my students pretty regularly. And so if you've got a Bible with you, you can take a look at Genesis chapter 1. There at the end of Genesis chapter 1, after God has created spaces and then created inhabitants for those spaces, it's so beautiful to see how Genesis 1 is arranged, and how God lovingly and carefully, meaning with care, creates everything that is there. It's so very different from other ancient Near Eastern accounts of creation. I think, some people will argue that the Bible is borrowing from those kinds of things, or the Bible is influenced by those kinds of things. I think if we understand influence in the right way, that might be helpful. I can respond to someone and offer critique, and in a way, what they've done has influenced me, but the influence is, my response to that is a corrective. And so I think it's fair to say that what we see in Genesis 1 and 2 is a corrective of some of these other ancient Near Eastern creation accounts. That it's not due to violence, it's not due to gods and goddesses who are capricious and cold and unfeeling, or warring with each other, or anything else like that. That it's on the basis, the gracious initiative of a loving Father, who, again at His gracious initiative, creates humans in His image. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. Verse 26 said, "Then God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, so that they may rule, or have, so that they may rule and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, and male and female He created them. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Those words are probably familiar to many of us, but the concept behind some of them might not be. So this is what I have been teaching in churches for a while now, but particularly what I teach my students. That word image in Genesis 1 means something like a commissioned representative. Elsewhere, that Hebrew word gets used with a connotation of idol. The idea behind an idol is this statue represents some other thing behind it, god or goddess or spirit or something like that. In Genesis 1 there, God has created an image of himself, persons, male and female, to represent him. Obviously not in all the same ways, right? That's absolutely evident. But God has created his image, humans, his image bearers, to be his commissioned representatives. If you continue reading the language there, particularly in Genesis 1, verse 28, fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over it. That's royal language. That God, who is king over all, by his gracious initiative, invites humans to partner with him in the rule over the world. And again, it's not because we're so awesome. It's not because we deserve this. It's not because we've coerced or persuaded God to do this. It's by God's gracious initiative that he creates and he shares. God creates and he shares his creation. And so God shares the rule of his creation with his creatures. And so in a royal sense, we have those kind of royal prerogatives. But also, if we take a look at Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, it says, the Lord God took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. To work it and to keep it. Now that kind of language of to work and to keep has, in other parts of the Hebrew Bible, kind of a priestly connotation. The priests, some of their duties are described with these words or with these images. I think it's fair to say that God, again, by his gracious initiative, has granted to humans both royal and priestly prerogatives. Royal and priestly prerogatives to partner with him, again at his gracious invitation, to partner with him to bring about the beauty and flourishing and goodness and and all the qualities, bring about the flourishing of creation, the flourishing of the world. A way to put it is to take the garden that's planted there in Eden and let that be the training ground where we continue to follow God's lead and expand the borders of that garden by ruling and having dominion and filling and guarding and keeping and working it. And that garden, meaning that where we see God walking, that hot spot of God's presence and his goodness and his beauty and his majesty and the life that is characterized by God's presence, that garden was supposed to be for us a place that we would spread and expand. Again, by God's gracious invitation, following his lead and so on. But the rest of the story. There in Genesis chapter 3, we choose our own way of doing that. And so we introduce what I have been calling for a while now. What gets introduced into the story is the ancient and accursed rebellion. The ancient and accursed rebellion. of Genesis 3. The language of curse shows up several times there in Genesis 3. And then really throughout the rest of the Bible, we see God in various ways partnering with his people, again at his gracious invitation. God is calling us, inviting us, offering, to bring us back into a right standing with him. And he does that through various means, particularly through covenants. Covenants are relationships. It's a way that they would have understood in the ancient Near East, that that two parties are now in a relationship with each other. There are expectations of behavior, like any relationship, right? That doesn't have to be crass or just economic. Like that's any relationship. That's any relationship. And so within these covenant structures, we have expectations for behavior, and there are blessings and curses associated with fulfillment and the rejection of the terms of the covenant. Well, consistently, the root term of the covenant is something like, be faithful. Be faithful. It is obviously a loving fidelity. It's obviously a loving fidelity to God. And the details look different in different times. Moses' commandments make sense for them in their context and so on. And then when we go on through basically the whole Old Testament, and eventually we get to Jesus, who is the one who is able to faithfully, perfectly, fully keep that covenant faithfulness. He's able to perfectly maintain that covenant faithfulness, and is therefore able to establish a new way of experiencing God's relationship, a new covenant, basically. And what is so unique about the new covenant is the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And so, in many ways, the new covenant is substantially different from the old covenant, and yet the mandate, all the way from Genesis 1 and 2, in many ways remains the same. That God, by his gracious invitation, is asking us to partner with him to bring about life, and peace, and beauty, and goodness, and the flourishing of creation and humanity. Just like we had in the garden, but now we are empowered, literally indwelt, with God's own Spirit in order to fulfill that gracious invitation, in order to respond faithfully to that invitation. Now, at a real practical level, what this means when we do something like sin, for example, it's no longer just, I messed up. It's no big deal. It's like, no. This is what I try to get my students to understand a lot. When you sin, what you do, whether, intentionally or out of ignorance, what you do is that you participate in this ancient and accursed rebellion that is hell-bent on the corruption, perversion, and destruction of creation, particularly the corruption, perversion, and destruction of the image of God, of humanity, of individual persons made in God's image. That when you sin, you willingly participate, or unintentionally participate, but you participate nonetheless in this ancient and accursed rebellion. That is what happens when you sin. So what Jesus' invitation is, reject that. Finally die from that. Because if you're dead to that, then it no longer has any power over you. So die to that. And then experience the new life that is characterized by the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. That is the promise, one of the promises of the new covenant. And that your new life in Christ simultaneously includes a rejection of the ancient and accursed rebellion and the the enthusiastic, loving, faithful acceptance of what God offers in the kingdom of heaven, in the area of his reign and rule and dominion. And that by God's gracious invitation, you now, like in Genesis 1, you are now called to participate with him in the power of his Holy Spirit to bring about the life and peace and beauty and goodness and flourishing that is evident in the kingdom. That is how I present the Christian life. And I do that in like the first and second day of class, because I want them to see that the Christian life is so much more than just, man, I hope my good days outweigh my bad days. I hope I didn't cuss too much. I hope I didn't drink too much. I hope I didn't do this, that, and the other. I just hope that I can barely squeak in. Man, if that's where you're at, okay, let's work with that. But the Christian life is presented as something so much bigger and greater and grander than just be a good boy or girl so you can go to heaven when you die. Again, if that's where you're at, okay, let's work with that. But let me urge you, the story is so much bigger. The story is really so much bigger. And that what we do helps or hinders God's mission. A mission that he has so graciously invited us to participate in because of his loving kindness. That's the Christian story in a nutshell that I present to my students. And so with a little bit of my own personal history and kind of explaining our move from South Texas to Central Arkansas, I wanted to share some of that with you and to share, this is the kind of stuff that I teach my students. And this is how I operate. This is how I see sort of what we're doing. And so I really appreciate y'all joining us today. There are more episodes coming. More things that we're going to talk about and do here on Faith Unfolds. But God bless y'all. Have a great rest of the day.